Hey memorizers, Anthony Metivier here with another Magnetic Memory Mondays video. If you're not already a subscriber to the newsletter, watch this video to the end and I'll let you know how you can get on the list while it's still free. This video is a demonstration video walkthrough of how that I use Excel files to store the words that I've memorized for the purposes of testing and just in general to have them cataloged. As I talk about in the books, I think that part of memorization is just knowing that we have things stored somewhere. When we are trying to memorize something and put it into the void, as I like to call it, we may be experiencing some unconscious anxiety that we're going to lose it, so we don't really pay proper attention in the first place. But if we know that that word is going somewhere, then we have this basic level of security that at the very least we have a place to go to look for it. And to really solidify that feeling, I think it's very important to go through this process of predetermining locations and making a file that we can go to test what we've done. And I'll talk about testing and the best ways to do it in a moment. So it's really as simple as creating a folder somewhere on your computer. And here's mine for German. And if you look inside, you'll see that I have created 26 different Excel files, each one corresponding to a letter of the alphabet. And the reason why I do that instead of just having one Excel file is that I don't have to add too much columns here and there and constantly fiddle and scroll up and down for the entire alphabet. I just simply go to that letter and add some new material or visit it for testing, and it's relatively manageable. And I've also, just for the purposes of organization and having a kind of schematic in my mind, I created a key. And so if we look at the key, you can see that I've just put the alphabet up and down, and then I note down what each of those locations happens to be. So old high school here, another old high school, an entire neighborhood, even a movie, a house inside of a movie I've used. And these are just notes for myself. You could be more detailed and elaborate, but as long as you know for yourself what exactly these things mean, then you've just created you've made it much more concrete for yourself, this memory palace system. So one of my favorites is the letter Z. So I've just copied and pasted a number of stations within that memory palace location to show you in a file. And this is actually from some years ago, and I haven't revisited it for some time. I did it very simply back then, and I just would open a file, and this is the letter Z, and this particular letter Z journey is from Potsdamer Platz to the Staatsbibliothek, or the Stabi in Berlin. It's a very, very beautiful walk. It starts at the embassy, Canadian embassy, and it goes all the way to the library, and there's multiple stations inside of that library, and you can move beyond there. And so from here, I've just gone into, for purposes of demonstration, I've just gone from the embassy into a movie theater and halfway out of the movie theater. And one thing to notice is that I am taking a lot of care in constructing this journey, that I start at a place that I can move forward and always add new stations. So even when I get into that library, I want to construct that journey in such a way that I don't cross my own path and I don't trap myself inside of the library somehow. I want to be able to get out of the library without crossing my own path, so I can add more stations to include more letter Z words, and that would involve going all the way up to the Hauptstrasse in Schöneberg and beyond. So just to quickly go through this, I have the embassy, the intersection, there's the Berlin Wall Memorial, and there's some escalators and stairs that go down into the subway train system. Then this is the Sony Center entrance. And again, whatever notes remind you are perfectly fine. I don't need to write out the whole Sony Center word, so I just and it's the same thing. Like there's a table there. There's actually dozens of tables in the entrance to the Sony Center, but I just put table, and there's actually a particular table that I use in my memorization at that station. Then there's the doors into the movie theater there, and an escalator going down. There's another escalator going down. Drink counter. Movie theaters are really great because you also have a number of cinemas inside of them, or screening rooms. So you can actually walk along one side and then back out the other and have a whole room, screening room, that you can use for multiple stations. So you can have the entrance going into the right of the screening room. You can have the front right side of the room by the screen, the front left side of the room by the screen, the exit, and use the different corners. You can use the center, the front row, the back row, whichever way comes naturally to you to organize that, so long as you follow this principle of not crossing your own path and not trapping yourself somehow. So most of these rooms, screening rooms, they allow you to go in one side and out the other. So I haven't done that in this particular example, but if I were to use this again and I wanted more stations, before even getting started, I would predetermine all of that and make as many stations as I really wanted, so long as I can naturally travel through them without thinking about it. So anyway, without carrying on, there's more going back up the escalators and so forth, and there's a particular place where movie posters are stored that also can become stations. So, and then what I've done here is actually cataloged the words that live at these stations, and then I've sort of given myself the meanings of these words. In this particular example, I haven't gone through the step of writing down the associations that I made. So let's look at a slightly more elaborate example. Here's for a Spanish word, ayudar, which I'd place in Aberdeen Mall, using as a bridging image for a lot of A words, the magician Michael Amar. And so he's placed at the entrance of a shopping mall with Yoda, and Yoda and Death Star come to really get this ayudar sound. Whenever possible, trying to keep the sounds of the words connected with the images. You know, you're using English to help generate the sounds of another language. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't always work that way. But whenever possible, you compound these things together and you'll get this sound ayudar. And there's a terrible, terrible, memorable irony here, is that, you know, Amar doesn't necessarily want to go into the Death Star, so he has to be kicked, but it's to help him. So that terrible irony is part of the memorable aspect of the story. Now, in terms of extending this to a phrase, an idea might be to have a question like ¿Cómo puedo ayudaro?, which means, you know, how may I help you? And so the image changes a little bit, and I would actually add this image to the side in the imagined space of the shopping mall entrance. And now I have Perry Como to get that sound of como. In case you don't know Perry Como, he's an entertainer. And he's eating peyote, Perry Como puedo, peyote, and ayudarlo. Now, the Death Star sound isn't going to be very helpful anymore in terms of the ending, ayudar. We now need ayudarlo. So it happens that instantly comes to my mind another magician named Ed Marlowe. So I can now bring all these things together. And I think if you find when you're in a relaxed state, these things, these little coincidences, little incidences that you have in your mind are just going to come and help you build these images and so forth that really sunder these words for you and bring them to the forefront of your mind. And it gets stronger the more you practice this, the ability to come up with these images. So let's test this now. I've opened up a little file here. Normally I write down things on paper and then open up the file to check later, word per word, for the purposes of testing and rehearsing to see how strong the images are and see if anything needs to be repaired in the memory palace for a particular letter. And but in this case, just for using the computer as an example, I'd maybe open a blank file And here's the stuff that I've worked on, the ayudar and the phrase como puedo ayudarlo. And so what I want to do is test. I would normally test half a dozen or so at a time, and they would all be portioned out as suggested in the magnetic memory books. And I just want to cover this up, and I want to test myself. So I remember it's ayudar, and that phrase that I wanted to learn was como puedo, and then I had, so it was ayudarlo, yeah, ayudarlo, because it was peri como, eating, peori, and then instead of Michael Amar, it was Marlo. So let's see how that I did. Como puedo ayudarlo? Como puedo ayudarlo? So there you have it. It's it comes like that, and that's part of the testing, and you go through it. And I did it without going with a flashcard. Como puedo ayudarlo? Como puedo ayudarlo? Como puedo ayudarlo? Como puedo ayudarlo? So to briefly sum up, this is how I go about using Excel files to organize and store an actual physical record of the associations that I've made. And I think it serves several purposes, one of which is just for testing. Any memory champion who's training for a tournament and so forth is going to need a means of testing for accuracy and making sure that everything they've memorized is memorized as it should be. So we do that to test and to rehearse, and we do it in a way that isn't rote learning, as I demonstrated. You just go back, even before opening the file, actually write down on a piece of paper, ideally not in the computer, without even that Excel file open whatsoever. Write down the words you've memorized, some phrases, and then go look at open the Excel file and compare them and see how we've done. It's very, very important to do it correctly, so it's not rote learning, that you're actually using the associations and that you've actually got that material in your mind. So there's a folder. It's got the 26 different Excel files. Different languages will require a different number. And other languages that don't share the English alphabet obviously are going to need some thinking. I'm working on that now, actually. Different methods for different alphabet systems, and that's coming up, so stay tuned. And speaking of staying tuned, if you're watching this and you're not already a subscriber to the Magnetic Memory Mondays newsletter and you would like to be, then all you simply have to do is send a blank email to learnandmemorize@zoho.com. And if you want to say hello, that's great as well, but simply a blank email will do the trick, and you'll be added to the list.